Hello, and welcome to the Optimized Equine Podcast. Today I am truly honored to be joined by someone who has been very impactful to my horsemanship, and that is none other than Patrick King. So Patrick, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you, Tamara. The honor is mine. Thank you for inviting me.
Patrick has been one of my biggest corner turners, and that's a term I've kind of thrown around in some different episodes here and there, so I'm going to go ahead and define it real quick. And to me, a corner turner can be a person, an animal, an event, could be a number of things, but it's moments that change our trajectory in our lives and what we're doing, and you definitely have been that. I think a lot of times our corner turners, we don't necessarily recognize that there are corner turners, like right when we meet them, but when you look back, you're like, wow, I can't imagine where I would be without that. And you are definitely one of those for me. And so I wanted to talk to you about all the awesome things you do. And also I can only imagine it would be interesting to hear about your corner turners today. But to start, can you give us a little bit of a rundown of who you are and what you do? I know that's much easier said than done, but
Right? Yeah. No, thanks. I think I'll try to give like the 15-second elevator pitch story.
Oh yes, let's hear it in 15 seconds. Go.
Right. Exactly. But basically, so I'm a horse trainer and a clinician. I make my living teaching horses and people. Dressage is my passion. Western was originally my background. I used to joke all the time that I was dressage by passion, but Western by function, just for the horses that I was riding and that sort of thing. But now I am more focused with dressage horses. And on the side of the biggest thing that I think I would say that I do is I really try to help the horse find relaxation as a baseline for their understanding and their acceptance of all the questions that we have to ask, regardless of what the discipline is. Because I think that that's really important. So I would say that our number one job as a trainer is to improve the horse's confidence as a learner. And I think that that's important for developing in our students as well. So, when people ask what's my main focus, I guess it's that. It's helping the horses and the students to have confidence as learners. And to really find, particularly in the horses, to find that relaxation that is the base to reset the body, so that then we can help the horse to come to the equation in their best selves, mentally and physically.
Don't want to get too lost too quickly, but I think the relaxation thing is interesting to talk about, because I think there's certain groups of people, it's kind of like an eye roller, like, oh yes, this relaxation thing. And I think that's sad, because it's so important. And like, you mentioned the learner thing, you can't really be a good learner without relaxation. And I think if everybody could see it that way, they could be a little more open to the value of relaxation, rather than just kind of like rolling the eyes. Oh yes, we relax, and you go ahead and sit in the pasture with your horse, I'll be doing things. It's like, it doesn't have to be like that,
right.
know?
Well, and I think there's several different types of relaxation, right? And I tend to think of there being two different kinds of relaxation. One is that what I refer to as athletic relaxation, where the horse is, and the person, right, is clear from the negative tension that would get in the way of the body's functioning or of the mind being in a receiving state. And then there's the other kind of relaxation that's like, we'll call it non-athletic relaxation.
Yes.
Right? Like, imagine at the end of a long work day, you're just flailed out on the couch with a big bowl of ice cream or something, like, that's not the kind of relaxation we're talking about as far as helping the horse come there from a learning perspective. And now sometimes the horse does go into that spot if they're unpacking a lot of negative tension. They have to hit that reset button somehow, and oftentimes they will go there. But the relaxation that I'm aiming for is one that's very engaged, right, as well as engaging. Right, there's interest in the body, there's curiosity, they're asking questions, but they're uncluttered from the negative tension that would get in the way of learning and proper functioning.
Uncluttered. And that's one of the things I think you've helped me work on so much, is not cluttering up what I'm trying to do with a horse, with A, being too busy, and then B, let me put it this way. You helped me to not throw out the baby with the bathwater when I made this big switch of like doing all this busy, working way too hard stuff and then finding this relaxation thing. It's really easy to get lost down that road, and like, oh, if we're not relaxed, then it's horrible. Yes, the goal is relaxation and we need it, but it's not what every moment is,
Right. Absolutely.
So,
And I think there comes, like you said it, the clarity, right? There has to be a clarity inside that. And we've kind of seen it in the industry over the last couple of years, this shift from kind of working on things, the mindset of working, almost being militant in the work, to this zero expectations, everything is great, fa la la, whatever. Well, that's no good either, right? Because the horse is looking for leadership. From a survival perspective, they're looking for someone to step in and say, I have a plan, right? Particularly a lot of our more bothered horses, the horses that people might call problem horses or troubled horses or whatever, those horses are looking for that leadership, but not from the domination side of leadership, right? They're looking for, somebody who's got a plan, who's got an agenda, right? There's this common thing now, saying, oh, just don't have an agenda, don't have a plan. Well, if I can say it, bullshit. Right? If you go into an interaction with your horse and you don't have a plan or an agenda, survival dictates from a prey species, from a herd animal particularly, survival dictates somebody has to have a plan. Maybe the plan is we're going to graze, but somebody has to have a plan. And if you don't, the horse says, oh shit, we're both going to die unless I step up and have the plan. Right? So then the horse has to take over. Not that they want to, but they know that you're both going to die if they don't. Right? So this idea of, and I know that's a really basic, bare bones way of thinking about it, but it's like somebody has to have that role, that influential role within the herd. And I'm not talking like pecking order and, all that stuff, because horses aren't chickens. But the idea is that, yeah, you do have to have a plan. I think we need to learn how to remove our attachment to the immediate outcome. But if we don't have some sort of an agenda, well, what are we doing? We're just following the horse. And now the horse is leading, right? If we're not able to lead in an inspiring way for our horse, right? I'm not saying that we're going out there and it's going to be that militant style of, now we do this, now we do this, now we do this, now we do this. To me, it's always a question of, what does this mean to you? How do you feel about this? Can we, work on this, improve this, that sort of thing. But I think there has to be a plan. Otherwise, you're just going out there and spending time with the horse, which is not a bad thing. But the horse is going to say, well, who's supposed to be taking care of this herd right here? If it's not you, it has to be me, or we both die. That's just basic survival.
I do think spending time with the horse, of course, it is very important. Go spend that time that's got no agenda, I guess you could say. It is important. And yet,
together, yeah.
Some people, I think, make that their whole thing. That's it. And really, would any human be happy in that situation? Like if I just sat in my home with my family and we never did anything, or like, that's not fun for anyone.
Right.
It's an interesting world. The no pressure, the horse makes all the choices. There's nothing mean or wrong about putting out an idea or a plan or an agenda. That's not the problem ever. That's right. The bad stuff that we see out there in the horse world is not because someone made a plan. It's what they did. It's what they did in the process.
It's the attitude behind the plan, right? And that's what I think is so important. It's the attitude behind the plan. Like one of a very inspirational horseman that I've spent some time with Tom Curtin. He's got a way of saying it. He says, it doesn't matter what I think of your horsemanship, and it really doesn't even matter what you think of your horsemanship. What's most important is how your horse feels about himself when he's with you. And I think, like, if you want to talk about a corner turner, like, I think even that phrase itself was a corner turner for me. That's one of those things that, can I ask my horse to piaffe, passage, canter pirouettes, jump a jump, go down the trail, work a cow, whatever? Can I ask my horse to do those things in a way that he feels good about himself because I asked?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's my job. My job is to be able to present that to him in a way that helps him feel like, man, he's the greatest thing with 4 legs and a tail. You know, it's the how we ask, right? It's the energy behind it, the intent. I talk all the time that our intention is our number one aid, right? So is your intention to make the horse do a thing, or is your intention to inspire them to do the thing with you, right? And I think there's a big difference in that.
There's a big difference, and it's really easy to, I can tell you from experience, it's really easy to have every intention to just want to inspire them, but that's so much easier said than done when all the other factors that are inside us and inside them come out, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Sometimes it's tough, right? Sometimes inspiring the horse can be really tough. Depending on their past life experiences, depending on who they are as a person, kind of how they come to the table, that sort of thing. And then, like you said, like our own stuff, right, that comes behind that. Because let's face it, as much as we'd like to be, we're not all perfect, you know. Shucks, right? Yeah, I know. I'm sorry.
Shucks.
I'm sorry.
So,
disappointing, but...
So you mentioned Tom Curtin. Now that kind of goes back to your Western roots. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Who else was impactful for you in that phase, and how did you make the transition to being a little more focused on the dressage and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so growing up, I was really an avid reader. And I feel like that was when people were just starting to come out with training videos and things like that, the VHS tapes, if anybody that listens to this remembers VHS tapes, right? But so I did everything I could to read everything I could get my hands on and watch all the videos that I could. And, you know, it seemed to me like every book would mention somebody else. And so I would say, okay, well, I got to look up that whoever that somebody else is, right? And then this next book would refer to somebody else, and so I would have to look up that somebody else. And there were many references, those in those books and magazine articles and things like that. Many references to Ray Hunt, and I got very fortunate to host a clinic for Ray many years back, and then eventually offered the opportunity to stay with Ray for a couple months, kind of an apprenticeship, you know, internship sort of an opportunity. So I figure he must have saw me at the clinic and thought, this guy really needs a lot of help. We gotta invite him out here. And it was interesting because at that point I thought that I knew what I was doing. I thought I had a handle on this stuff. By that point, I had a little bit of a business starting young horses under saddle. That was what I did to begin with. I was the guy that started the young horses, and I was the guy that fixed your trailer loading problems. And those are still two of my favorite things to do, because I think that those are two of the most important and impactful things in a horse's life. It's how we present those things to them. But Ray became very much a big influence. You know, I thought I knew what feel was. I thought I knew how to ride a young horse, ride any horse, up to that point. And then I realized that I didn't know, didn't really know anything. I will not forget the first day being on the ranch down in Texas with Ray, and his wife Carolyn was taking us around for a little tour, visit the horses in the paddocks and things like that. And I remember I reached out to pet a little, I think it was a little yearling quarter horse, and it shied back. And Carolyn kind of got at me a little bit, you know, and she said, well, the way that you approached that wasn't fitting for that horse. And at that point, I thought I was pretty darn good at getting a horse okay with what you would ask. right? So it was like, well, if you present yourself and they're not okay with it, here's how you keep presenting that so that they become okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Almost like looking back at it now that we have different terms and expressions, it was desensitizing and maybe even a little bit of flooding and things like that. And what Carolyn pointed out there was, that idea of, can you just present that so that they feel okay with every step of it, so that you don't have to go through all of that work to just get one okay with you, in that case, reaching out and petting them, so there was that idea of, how can I present myself in the best way for whatever that particular horse is, or whoever that particular horse is, so that I'm not overbearing or offensive, and that was a big thing. That's where the learning really started, right there. It was a great eye opener on day one.
Yeah, I think like what you described in the first part, it makes logical sense when you're in it. Oh, the horse didn't like this, so I'm going to help him be comfortable with it. It's not like you came in trying to be a dictator about it or anything.
Right, exactly.
But it is different than being more, it's like a whole other level of proactive, of how do I sense this to where there's no need for that. It's a big change, a big difference in how we handle horses. And I think some people are in a place, I know I've been there myself, and I think this is kind of what the whole hunter jumper thing was for me the whole time, is like, oh, horses do things and you make them okay with it, but it's all about us, like make you good for me. Well, what about the other way? It doesn't have to be all about me. And that, of course, ties into what makes this other kind of horsemanship sometimes so hard, but it's how it gets into the personal development side of things. Like, it's not about you. And I would have never thought at the time that I was being like egotistical or anything like that, but it's like, at the end of the day, it was all about what I want, when I want it, this is how I do it, so we better figure out how to make it work for you how I do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's funny because I think about that moment all the time, how I reached out to pet that horse, and it wasn't like, I would say from even my perspective, looking back on it now, I wouldn't say that it was abrupt, but it was too much.
Yeah.
Right. And that's subtle. And how subtle do we have to be to not be too much? Well, that depends. That goes from one situation to the next, right? Like, if you and I had never met, we've worked together several times. We spent a lot of time chatting and working together. And so even this conversation in itself pretty quickly went into comfort zone, right? But if we hadn't, well, then there'd be a different interaction going on there, right? I don't want to say a tiptoeing, right? But a little different presentation, right? From your side, different response from my side, that sort of thing. So it was really, I think about that frequently. It's like, well, I thought I was being pretty subtle, and for the way that I was approaching it, from the mindset I was coming from, yeah, I was being subtle, but not enough. Right? Not subtle.
So just out of curiosity, what would you do different now? Do you know?
It's funny. I've changed a lot when it comes to horses that I don't know. I don't reach out to them as much anymore. I'm a little bit more of a hands in my pocket until they reach out to me, until they ask for that. And if one comes bowling over top of me, that might be a different story. But I think there would be a little more breathing and being until there was an invitation, right? Or a curiosity. So when we say invitation, that invitation might be, well, what are you up to, right? From the horse's perspective, rather than just, to me, it's like, can you pet your horse for your horse rather than for you?
Yeah, it's a big difference.
Right. Yeah.
And
absolutely.
if your horse doesn't want it, can you stop yourself from getting offended or your feelings hurt or whatever, all the different ways that can go, because it makes such a big difference. And that kind of reminds me of one of the things that I know was a big piece of what makes you such a corner turner for me, and that was again, I go back to that relaxation thing. I was so stuck on like horses must be relaxed and happy, and if they're not, then we have fucked up. It's like
you must be relaxed.
yes, and then if they're not, it's like, well, either I did something wrong or we have to go back again. It's like, no, just let it happen. It's fine, get to the other side of it.
Absolutely. Sometimes you just...
I was just constantly not getting to the other side of any kind of anxiety. It was just like, anxiety, go back. That's not that helpful.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And if you think of that from the perspective of successive approximation, every time you get up to that tension, if you just completely revert and don't help them sort through that, you actually incrementally decrease the window of relaxation. Mm-hmm. So that can be really tricky. And that can be, that can become a totally paralyzing approach if we're not careful.
Oh, yeah. I think that's a word I actually used in the last episode. Paralyzing. Yes, it can be. It definitely can be. Were you ever stuck in like relaxation land like that? Or was it just not a thing so much at the time when you were going through this stuff? I feel like it's really a thing now, so it's really easy for people to get stuck there.
I don't feel like I know as soon as we finish this episode, I'm going to be like, oh, there was that time. But I don't think that I was ever really stuck in that. I think maybe I got a little deeper and missed the athletic side of it in places. But for the most part, my responsibility was working with horses for other people, and they did have goals, right? And performance goals and things like that. And so I was kind of I have a student who refers to me as the integrator. Like, can I take can I take 7 different pieces and 7 different philosophies and put them into something that gels and kind of makes everybody happy in there? And I think that's one of the things that I've always been really aiming for is, okay, can we accomplish this task? And can we accomplish it in the best way possible for that horse? Right. Mm-hmm. Now I look back on that and I think, there's some times, there's some instances where I think, well, maybe I could do that better today than what I did 20 years ago. Right. And I would hope for all of us that we would look at darn near everything and say, well, I did that 20 years ago and I could do that a whole lot better now, or faster now, or more thoroughly now, or things like that. I think I've always, on that perspective, had the goal crunch and how can we make that work into that goal crunch. And there's times when it didn't suit the timeline maybe that the owner had or that sort of thing. But I don't think I ever really got lost in that too much relaxation land. And I think a big part of that, to be honest, is that I've always made it a thing to seek more instruction. Mm-hmm. And I think that has helped me. That's helped me to stay away from those quicksand swamps or whatever, where I might get sucked in and lost in a spot like that. Yeah.
So after Ray, where to next?
Oh gosh. So after Ray was where I really got started with starting a lot more horses for English disciplines. Up to that point, it was primarily Western disciplines. And actually, that makes me think about one other kind of a corner turner. Was a client of mine, first client that ever referred to what I did as my program, which I thought was really interesting. And I was pretty young whenever he was a client, but it was really interesting. It made me think a little bit more. This fellow was a teacher as well as a horse trainer himself. Trained quarter horses and eventually got into training race horses more as a hobbyist. But he would have me come in and start his young horses. And one of the really important, I think, corner turners, or one of the kind of like that little angel on the shoulder, right? That little thought in the back of your head all the time. He had an index card pinned to the doorway on his tack room. And this was when he was primarily in the Western pleasure industry, working with these horses. And again, I was starting the young horses for him under saddle. And on this index card, he had it handwritten, Our job is not to make them a Western pleasure horse. Our job is to make them a solid riding horse and see if they want to do Western pleasure. And I thought that was and now I've got my thoughts about that as a discipline and that sort of thing, and we don't need to get into that. But that was one of those moments where I thought, here's this guy's career, and here's what he's made a name for himself as, and he was a judge, and he was, all these things. And his underlying philosophy was, well, let's see if that horse wants to do this, and maybe they don't, right? And so that really, to see that somebody like that could have their own permission to say that horse doesn't want to do this, and I'm not going to force him to do that. That was really an inspiring moment for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a big, like, philosophical corner turner,
Yeah. And that's having a dialogue with the horse. You're not, if the horse wants to or not is having a dialogue. And I think there's so many programs that have no dialogue. It's just one way, and that's a big, big difference, opening up dialogue. They've got things to say and got to be ready for it, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. And that dialogue, the way that he referred to what I did as my program, he was, I believe, looking back at it, I believe he was the first client that I had that was a professional in the industry. And the dialogue, like you say, the being respectful from one professional to another, and having that dialogue, having that conversation, and being able to say, I don't know that this horse is going to fit your program. What do you think about this? Being able to bounce ideas off, and things like that. And, eventually it has become a large part of my business working with other professionals. I would say a good half of my students, at least, are professionals in the industry. So that really set that stage for me of, you see a lot of this kind of competition and this, like, closeting your secrets, if there's such a thing, right? Or this competitive nature among professionals. And I like to joke that those are professionals with a lowercase p, kind of like when you're in dressage, the lowercase r is like you're just getting started as a judge in dressage, right? So it's like the lowercase p professionals, they're kind of just getting started, and they haven't earned their spurs, so to speak.
Many never change that. It's like the professionals, the professional, little p, and their clients, their little group. There's no other professionals around usually in those scenarios, and that's one, unfortunately, unless they work for them.
Exactly. So, yeah, that's either by default or by design. Sometimes those trainers, there's no others because the trainers themselves don't want there to be others, right? Because there's a lack of confidence or something like that keeps them from expanding and keeps them from growing out of that. But I think that that's really prohibitive on the professional side of things, significantly prohibitive. And on the students' side of things, for your clients, I think it's really important that everybody goes out there and learns from as many as possible. But again, like, I got really fortunate that I had early on in my career, I had that collaborative kind of attitude presented to me,
Yeah, I know in the beginning when I was working for another professional, it was like, oh yes, we'll have clinicians come in, yes. And it was for us, the students, and the head professional would ride in the clinic, but it was like a show. It wasn't like, there was no learning. It was like, we just have to do this because they're here and I'm supposed to ride with them, and we're going to make sure we do it on a day when no one's around anyway, or not many are around anyway. And it was never the kind of things that like you and I might do in a clinic. Holy cow, I feel like be a lot going on, a lot of learning going on for me. And in those, it was more like, oh yeah, well, that's a nice horse, real nice horse. It's like this show of we're bringing in clinicians, yeah,
More of
Okay.
a rah-rah session than...
Yeah. But was there really like learning of new things?
Mm,
Mm-mm. Not new things, it's just like, let's just do the thing we do and pat each other on the back about it,
yeah,
We're
there's not much
learning.
growth that happens in that.
Yeah. Yep. Now, I mentioned how you've been so impactful in my horsemanship and how I handle horses and all of that, but I have not yet mentioned how impactful you've been in being an inspiring teacher. So you are an amazing teacher to watch. I have watched you teach a huge variety of people and horses, and it is pretty amazing how you can just go from one to the next, and they could not be any more different. So,
Mhm.
how do you think you became such a good teacher to people?
Good teacher. That almost sounds like an accusation. Like, I don't know if I've earned that title yet.
Uh,
But
yeah.
thank you. That's, the learning process for me is so fascinating. Whether it comes to people or horses, or, I mean, you've seen me work with certain students and horses where, we might wait 20 minutes for the horse to sort something out, and I just get so excited about that, the boring stuff where we're just sitting and watching and waiting and things like that. That drives me.
Mhm.
Really seeing the horse or the student learn the thing or get curious or get a little bit more confident. So that for me it's a big reward. It's a big motivator. And it's something that I'm always aiming for, is how can I present myself better to this student or to this horse, like the student, whether it's two-legged or four-legged, right? How can I present myself better so that they can learn more thoroughly, so that they can understand sooner, that sort of thing. And then from there, it's just experimenting. Can I say this in a certain way that you understand it and that somebody else can understand it? Well, okay, for somebody else, maybe I have to say that a little bit of a different way, right? But so it's, yeah, that for me, it's the experimentation and the allowing ourselves to experiment. you
Mhm.
know uh, that I think is really important as a teacher, allowing ourselves to experiment so that the student can actually learn what it is we're trying to impart to them. And I've been really fortunate to have so many different students that's been a big key to it. When I was full-time on the road, I had it sorted out at one point. When I was full-time on the road, my average month included working with over 300 different students every month. And so that's different people and different horses.
Mhm.
And I feel like I was so fortunate in that, uh, because that gave me so many opportunities to experiment.
Yeah. And I think I'll say this too. You say, oh, dressage is my main thing, it's my passion. But I know you work with everything. I think for someone who doesn't know you at all, they hear that like, oh, he works with dressage people. Cool for them. No, Patrick works with everything. And it's definitely inspiring to watch, like all different kinds of people, all different kinds of horses. I know at this point that dressage is for everybody, but not everybody knows that. So I think that's really important to say. Like, yeah, Patrick says dressage, but he's not talking about competition dressage. You
Right.
could take that dressage word all the way out of it, and Patrick just works with people and horses.
Yeah.
And and that many 300 students a month. Yeah, I guess that's how you become a good teacher.
And for several years, I was basically on the road full time doing that. It was like 350 days a year at that point. I was on the road, and at that point, I had already started several thousand young horses under saddle. I think I figured it out at one point, and it was almost 3,000 young horses that I've started under saddle, that I've put the first rides on and the first several rides and that sort of thing. Uh, and it's that large of a number. It's like when you think of scientific studies, the N has to be big enough, right? A large enough N to make it a valid study. It's like, man, there's a large N when it comes to starting that many young horses and helping load that many horses in a trailer and things like that. And I have always been curious about all the disciplines. What is everybody doing? So I've ridden jumping horses. I've ridden, obviously the dressage horses. I've done the Western. I've done the working equitation. I've driven horses. I've, ridden horses on the racetrack. I've like all sorts of things, and I feel like I've been very fortunate with that, because I feel like you can't have that much exposure and not learn something.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, you mentioned how much you were on the road, and I know you did that for a very long time, and certainly it served you in many ways. But I will say this, in this time that you have been not so on the road, I have loved what has been evolving of, I guess we'll say your social media, but just what is out there. I feel like in the years before, I knew all these things about you from working with you so many times in person. But I feel like your social media, if we want to call it that, is so aligned with the Patrick I know. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I feel like the picture that was out there was not always, it was just very like businessy, And I feel like now it's like, this is who Patrick is. I don't think that was available online before. You had to work with you enough to get to know what Patrick was really all about. And so I've really loved that. And I know that is a result of you actually getting off the road and having the time to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Do you agree? Do you feel that? Or?
Yeah, well, I definitely agree. And, that when I was on the road full time like that, I had office help at the time. I had a business partner who was managing a lot of the social stuff, doing a lot of the back end, processing orders, and, being the contact for scheduling clinics and things like that. And I'll tell you what happened is people used to ask me all the time, when I was on the road full time like that, basically living from hotel to hotel, how long do you think you can do this? People would ask. And I would always say, oh, I've got, 10 or 15 more years of doing this, 10 or 15 more years of doing this, because I love it. And I still I could pack up the car tomorrow and go be on the road full time and love it. Right. And then I heard myself say once, it was one of those, like, you're watching yourself having this conversation kind of moments. I answered the question and I said, 5 or 10 years. And I thought, my window just got smaller. Like, what, did I notice something right there? And I feel like I developed enough self-awareness at this point to realize that, okay, I've got to be careful with that. Right. And that was about the time of COVID hitting and things changing anyway. So that was, the whole world was in a big transition period anyway. But, and that actually helped. That helped me to become more online virtually and things like that. And because the world shut down, the office help wasn't so necessary because I was able to be back at doing it all myself again. And that's when I think you've probably seen that turn to where it's like, that's a little bit more of me. That's a little bit more of, because it is me. Like, sometimes people are surprised when I answer their emails when they send in asking about, ordering a cavasson or signing up for an online course. It's like, yeah, I'm the, what's the expression? The chief cook and bottle washer, right? It's like, that's it. If there's a typo in any of the promotional anything, that was me. That lands on me. If somebody didn't get back to you on the email, I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm a little short-staffed here. And I say that jokingly because I wouldn't want it to be any other way again at this point. I'm loving it. And I stopped being on the road full time before I got burned out from being on the road full time. And I think that's really important because I still look forward to every clinic that I go to, every time I go to a new barn to teach, things like that. I'm still looking forward to it just as much as what I was before. And I'm really loving the being home, being able to create more content, work with more students. At this point, it's a full, probably 50% or better of my work is virtual lessons, that sort of thing. So the ability to do that is fantastic. And taking in a couple horses here at home, taking in a very small number, so that I can really devote the time with those horses to develop them into what they want to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think while there is obviously a huge benefit to the number of horses and people you were able to work with when you were traveling like that, I have said many times in our conversations about how, oh yes, it must be nice to be the clinician because you show up and you do your thing and then you leave. It definitely gives you a different way to work on things and learn things when you are stuck with someone or horse or whatever for a little while. I say that jokingly, of course, not stuck with, but you know what I mean. Like, it's definitely different to plant the seed and leave than it is to have to stay and water it and watch it. I was talking about that in the last episode as well. Like, I think I said with her, I just want the seed to sprout. I felt like that a lot with my clients. Like, get it, because I'm there with them all the time. Whereas like Patrick can plant the seed and go home.
Right.
And it's different.
Exactly.
It's different. Both valuable though. So I think that
absolutely both valuable, and both sides a huge responsibility, right? One for the, like you said, planting the seed, kind of giving that inspiration, showing like this is what you can get to. And then the other side is the daily minutia, right? And really cultivating that seed that has been sown, that ground that has been tilled. Exactly.
Yeah. And however long that takes, because sometimes it's a little while. And I know for me that is challenge I'm not gonna say was. I'm better now. It's not challenging at all now. Is challenging to let that timeline just be, just let it be what it is. Like, knowing what can be can make it hard, like when you see what could happen. But very valuable to just have the day in and day out and see where it goes.
You had asked, and we kind of got off track, but you had asked about when did I switch to more dressage as being the primary. And that was after my time with Ray, and I started having more folks send me English horses, if you want to call them. Now, growing up, I showed English and Western, so I've always been just as comfortable in breeches and tall boots as I am in jeans and chaps, but I started having, just because of the network and because my reputation had been built so much at that point for putting a good start on horses, helping them to be solid and dependable, that sort of thing. I started getting a different kind of a crowd, different client base, and started getting a lot of the young dressage horses and some young jumping horses that were going to go on to different careers. And that opened up the opportunity to come and watch some of the clinics that were being presented by the dressage trainers in the dressage barns where I'd be working in there. And it was funny. I think back, there's one in particular, a dressage trainer, that would be teaching a lesson on one half of the arena, and I'd be putting the first ride on a young horse on the other half of the arena. And there were times when I'd come bouncing back and forth, and things like that. But for the most part, it worked pretty well. But I remember my first dressage lesson. It was on one of my own horses. It was a horse I had developed. He was in what we refer to as the two rein in the Western side of things. So he was wearing a Bosalillo and a spade bit. And man, I could put that horse anywhere I wanted him. Body position, body control, I had all that. And in this lesson with the dressage instructor, it was, let's ask for leg yield. Oh, yeah, I got that. Let's go shoulder in and haunches in. Haunches in, oh, gosh, I could fold them in half if I needed to, And then she asked for a half pass, and I got like 5 strides into what I thought was a half pass. And she was like, stop, what the hell was that, And looking back, I realized I didn't know anything about any of that lateral work. Right? I had enough body control, as you hear so much in the Western side of things. I had enough body control that I could put the horse wherever I wanted him. But that didn't mean he was getting any value out of the work that I was doing. Right? And so that set me on another path of really learning about the mechanics of the movement and how does specific movement work the body in specific ways. And so that fueled my passion even more for getting into dressage and learning deeper. And it was fairly soon after that I met a gentleman named Mark Russel, who became a very big influence on me. Mark was a student of Nuno Oliveira, and he just had this way of being. He's one of those people that just you felt comfortable around him, and you felt like you could make mistakes and ask questions, and it was going to be okay, right? And I that's something that I try to really think about, and I try to be. I try to have my students, and horses and humans, be okay with making mistakes and with hunting for answers and things like that. But Mark was really great at, for me anyway, at imparting that. How can everything about me help the horse feel better about themselves and set them up to be doing these things that we want them to do? So it was more of an all-encompassing being together rather than just doing together, if that makes sense. So that was another real big corner turner for me, was feeling that, and that has inspired me, to become a student in Portugal and Spain at the riding schools there, and really learning more on the classical side of things, and really getting into that, but carrying with that the psychology and the base horsemanship, the foundation stuff that came from Ray. It's like, can we integrate those things together?
I think when you were talking about body control, I think it's really interesting how it is very important that we are able to use the word control, use the word influence, whatever word you're into. It's important. But I think, there's in a huge part of the horse world, and no matter what discipline we're talking about, it turns into like, I can make that horse do anything. I can, like you said, I can put him anywhere. But why? Just because? Or like, is it, I like to use the mutually beneficial thing a lot. There's no point in doing any of it if it's not mutually beneficial somehow. Exactly. That's definitely something I learned from you, that we're not going to do it if there's not a good reason to do it.
Right.
It kind of goes back to, like I was saying with the clinic thing in my past life. It's like, is this just about a show? Oh, good job, pat on the back. You made that horse go really sideways. Like,
right.
Cool. But why?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that is such an important thing, because, there can become such a focus on body control that, sort of, as you mentioned at the very beginning, that idea of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Like, just because you can ride a contortionist doesn't mean you're going to actually get the thing, whatever the thing is, done, right? And what's your goal with turning the horse into a contortionist? Is it to show that I've got control in this situation and that situation? Great. Did it have to go to that stage? Do you have to do that? It makes me think of, there were several horses early in my career that, I don't even know, is RFD TV still a thing?
I think so, but it's been so long since I've had the television to myself that I have no idea.
There you go. Right. But so there was a fellow that had a show on RFD TV, and everybody would know the name if we mentioned it. But I had two different horses at completely different times, not related, not same owners, get on the trailer at his place and get off the trailer at mine. And they would have, in one instance, there was still blood dripping off from spurs. And this was when Ray was still alive. And I called him because I thought, gosh, well, if this so-and-so is working with these horses and the owners are dissatisfied, what am I going to do? How am I going to work with this horse? And so I called him for advice, basically just a little bit of hand holding to feel a little more confident with it at that point. But both of those horses, you could fold them in half. You could bend their nose around to your boot, and they could still bronk like something that, that came from a serious rodeo. And they were still scared, right? And just because you can put the body in a place doesn't mean that they're okay being there, right? And that really helped me to understand the difference between obedience and acceptance. And I think, when we look at, like, of course, a big thing in dressage now is this roll cur and these horses ridden behind the bridle and all this stupid shit that they do with flopping the necks back and forth and all of this disconnected stuff. And so much of that comes from separating the body rather than uniting the body, right? I think we have to, when it comes to teaching things for our horse, we have to isolate, right? But then we have to be able to recombine. We have to be able to put that horse, help him understand how to use himself, right? So those horses that we see going around the show ring that, blue tongues and all this, I'll call it bullshit, not horsemanship, that's happening. It's like, oh, well, I've ridden those horses on the Western side of things. I know exactly how those horses are developed. That's when there's too much of a focus on things that aren't important to that horse in that moment. And then when you're adding importance to it, or when you're adding speed to it, or when you're adding more sophisticated things to the conversation, you really don't have anything. And so you've got to monkey it around, you've got to force it around, you've got to try to make it happen, try to kind of duct tape things together to make it look like a picture. When in the reality, at the end of the day, if you gave that horse a pen and paper and said, what did you work on? They couldn't write down a single one of the exercises that you worked on. They couldn't tell you what it was. They could say, I got shoved around, I got pulled on, I got kicked. But they couldn't tell you, we did a shoulder in from this letter to that letter, and then I was executing a circle, and then I was asked to do that. They couldn't tell you what those exercises are. And sorry, that's a bit of a rant, but this is where I get really particular on, is my horse actually understanding the question that I'm asking? Just like what you said, mutually beneficial. Do they understand that I'm asking for whatever it is I'm understanding or asking for? Are they accepting the question, or are they being obedient? And is that obedience a blind obedience for fear of more pressure, right? If I don't do this, then it's going to escalate, right? Like there's that, I get asked the question frequently, like, well, don't you increase your phases? Because that was something that's, that's a common thing, increase the ask, right? It's like, well, no, why? I'm going to let him sort it out. If I ask, what's 2 + 2? And he's anxious and throws out the number 7, I'm not going to overly correct that. I'm going to just keep asking the same question until he is able to be comfortable first and then actually understands what is 2 + 2.
And I think sometimes people need to zoom out even farther and go, am I even asking a question? Because I don't think they are often. Yeah, I know I wasn't. I certainly don't mean to put that on everybody else in the world. I know I wasn't. There was a lot of time spent on horses where I'm getting paid. And was I really asking anything? No, I was telling. Everything was telling. All of it is telling. Yep.
I was shoving this body that I'm sitting on around through these moves, or, into these positions, or absolutely.
Yeah. And, a question is not a question if no is not a valid answer. I know I'm not saying that exactly as a quote of where I heard it probably, but, you get what I'm saying.
Right, exactly. I think that sounds to me, and maybe we're thinking of two different things, but I've heard Leslie Desmond say, if no is not an option, yes has no meaning.
Yep, exactly. There, thank you. I knew you'd spit that out word for word. Thank you, sir.
I probably messed it up too, but that's
I don't think you did. Another thing I thought of when you were talking about all that was
when I was ranting.
When you were ranting, so before our podcast, I did go back to see how long it had been since our first clinic, which, by the way, we just had our 6-year anniversary of our first clinic. So,
oh man, yes. You didn't even send me flowers. Oh,
I know. So sorry. But yes, I did. You didn't get them?
No, I did. They didn't show up.
I'll call 1-800-Flowers. I'm pissed. I paid a lot of money. But
There you
anyway,
go.
so it has been 6 years, and I also found, as I was searching to figure that out, a quote that I posted of yours, and I probably won't say it right, so correct me. Something
Oh,
along the lines of, "You can't outmuscle an emotion,"
yeah. Oh
and
gosh,
that's
absolutely. You got
yeah,
that one right.
that is what I was thinking of when you're talking about all that. People are doing so many things with body control, but
Hmm.
it doesn't matter. You cannot force what's going on in there, you know?
Yeah. No, you can't outmuscle an emotion. You can't rush understanding, right? You can't rush confidence. Uh, you can't outmuscle an emotion. Now, this is where it became such a thing, and it still is. This idea: if you ask the horse to lower their head, they'll relax. There's a mistake between causation and correlation right there. If the horse begins to relax, often the head will lower. It doesn't mean that lowering the head makes them relax. It's not like a light switch that you can switch it on,
Mm-hmm.
or off. Um, but that's similar, right? It's that idea of fighting with trying to outmuscle the emotion.
And we can do things with our body that help their mind get to a place.
Hmm.
But again, it always comes back to observing, is it really happening? Is it, or did you just I checked the box, I lowered the head, or I did the thing?
Right. Exactly. Are we doing things by rote, or are they actually active participants in the process? Yeah. Um, yeah. So I got the opportunity actually to teach at an expo with Mark. It was a small expo, um, more clinic format really than expo, and Mark was teaching there, and I was teaching there. Craig Johnson was teaching, and Eitan Bet Halakmi was teaching there from the Cowboy Dressage, if folks don't know who he is. It was a really neat clinic, very intimate. I'll say it was incredibly poorly attended for the quality of those other teachers that were there. And it was, it was so much fun. To me, it really started to set the stage for teaching with other professionals in a setting like that. It came full circle. Everybody was able to bounce off of each other in the presentations and things like that. But that was a really great opportunity. And then I had Mark out to my place to teach. And it's just so, again, like I said, so inspiring as a teacher to really help you feel comfortable as a student. And from that point, I got the opportunity to audit a clinic with Charles de Kunffy, and he was teaching in Ohio. I happened to be out there like a day earlier or something like that from a clinic that I was teaching not too far from there, and I got the chance to audit, and I was the only auditor, and I couldn't believe it. But I still can't believe it. But it was really fascinating because I got to sit right up there next to Charles, and all the side comments and side conversations that we shared, between horses and during the horses and things like that. And he's equally inspiring as a teacher. Every horse that came in, every rider that came in, got the same respect that he afforded to every other rider. So the horse that was schooling Grand Prix, and the horse that was not even at training level, and the rider that didn't understand what a 20-meter circle is, got the same respect as what that Grand Prix horse got. And that to me was very inspiring as a teacher. And I've had the chance to take several lessons with Charles and host a few clinics for Charles. And everything about the way he teaches and the way he presents himself to the students is very inspiring to me. And watching him teach a clinic, watching him teach a horse a lesson, seeing how he forms and shapes the exercises, it's something that he says all the time. He says, "You are the body worker. You are the chiropractitioner," he would say. Watching these horses come in, and you can see, okay, here's the asymmetry in this horse, and maybe there's a little unsoundness in this horse, and here's where this joint might be a little bit stiff. And through the process of his guiding through the figures and guiding through the exercises, you can just watch these horses become more sound and more athletic as they go through the lesson. And the lessons, average about 45 minutes. And by the end of it, those horses look and feel, even inside their own minds, feel so much more fantastic than they came in as. And that's just so inspiring. It's like, that's something I try to watch and study, when I'm watching a horse go, like, okay, what exercise would Charles do for this? What would he have this rider do? That sort of thing. It was really fantastic. And I got the chance to participate in a trainer's clinic with him at JJ Tate's place in North Carolina. And that was really fantastic, where he was talking to us as the participants in that, watching the horses go. What would you have them do here? Why would you have them do that? And I think that's something that a lot of riders, trainers, clinicians don't get the opportunity to really question. Why would you have that go that way? What would you do there? And how would you explain that if you were trying to teach a teacher to present that way? How would you do that? And that was, it's always fascinating to watch Charles teach, and especially to be a rider for him, in that. And yeah. One of the things that Mark Russell said was that if he had the chance to go back, he would go back to Portugal. And he was, as I said, he was a student of Nuno Oliveira. And he really inspired me in so many ways. But the mention of going back to Portugal, going back and riding, that really stuck with me. And I had done some expos through the winter for a little while, and I'm a little bit of a princess in the cold. You've heard me complain about being cold before. But there was, the early spring expo season is usually still a little bit cold, things like that. And back when I had a business partner working with me, she'd mentioned, you could spend the same time. You could go over to Europe, you could go to Portugal, we could go to Spain, and you could work on your learning. And maybe we could find a way, bring some students over also, make it kind of learning vacations for the students and that sort of thing. But because one of the things, being on the road full time like I was at that point, it was hard for me to keep up my learning, right? And my learning has always been a big thing for me. If I were to say that I had a favorite position in this whole thing, it's being the student. I love teaching. I really do. I love teaching. I love learning even more. Like, if I could be a full-time professional student, oh man, sign me up, right? And so when I was on the road full-time like that, I didn't get many opportunities to be the student. So I took every chance I got. If a clinic would cancel for whatever reason, I would try to find some place to go to be a student, and so I've gone to farrier school and done saddle fitting courses and bodywork courses and things like that. I've tried to, carve out opportunities for that to happen. And then that opportunity came up, the mention of instead of teaching at the expos, going to Europe, going to Portugal, going to Spain, and being a student there. And it was Mark's mention of that was really the inspiration for that. And getting the opportunity to ride with Luís Valença and his family in Portugal is fantastic. Luís Valença is noted as being one of the best living classical masters. And it's just fantastic to see what they're accomplishing with the horses there, and how much their heart and soul is in that is so fantastic. And Senor Luis helped to coordinate for me to go and be a student, a short-term student at the Royal School in Spain, which is just a fantastic opportunity in itself. I've been back several times to do that as well. I feel like, and this is me, maybe, I don't want to say I'm gloating, but it's a self-realization that, when it comes to the Western side of things, I got the chance to really spend a lot of time with the legend, right, that everybody talks about, is Ray Hunt. It's like, yeah, we, like, every meal every day, starting with coffee in the morning and all the way through, sips of whiskey at night, still talking about horses with Ray, for a couple months. And then getting the opportunity to go ride at some of the big schools, as we talk about them, in classical dressage, and being able to put all of that together. And one of the big things, like, I look at it as, well, that's a responsibility for me as a teacher, that I've been able to do these things I've been able to study with these people, and it's my job to help impart what I've learned in the best way that I can. And I'm always working on that. I'm always working to try to be better. But it's that combination of that. But then there's also that idea of seeing the egos that we see in the horse world. So I've seen the best of the foundation of side of things and the best of the high school side of things. And I would say that all of that is pretty much the same. Trying to do the best by the horse, for the horse.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in the middle that it gets really muddy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In the middle is where you get so many people involved with egos and bullshit and the competitive side of things, where we lose sight of the horse. If at the very basic side of things, the very beginning of a horse's education, we can do that for the horse. And at the very height, we're talking high school, if we can do that for the horse, why is there such a disconnect in the middle? And I think a big part of it is that we're all learning.
Mm-hmm.
And learning can be uncomfortable unless you're like, I think you have to be, maybe, I don't know, a little masochistic to love to be a learner the way that I love to be a learner. Like, and I don't care who's watching. Like, I will screw up with reckless abandon in my search to do better and to learn more, with no holds barred, you know. But I think that that's where a lot of people get uncomfortable. A lot of people get uncomfortable being that student, especially when someone else is watching.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that spills over into competition. I think that that's where there's a lot of the negative ego that gets involved. And so I think that's why the middle is muddy.
It sure is.
It doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be. And I think that's important to understand too, is it doesn't need to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can climb out of the mud.
They make showers, I've heard.
They do. They do. Right? And it reminds me of the Buddhist saying, you know, that without mud, there's no lotus, right? There's no flower without the mud. But, you know, we can climb out of the mud. We can grow out of the mud.
So you mentioned the masters of, you meant the master of the foundation and the high school and that kind of thing. I think a lot of people can get very, it's very easy to be negative about the current state of affairs, and it's all like, oh, the masters this and the masters that.
Mm.
Do you think we can be better than the masters? I feel like for as much time has passed, it only makes sense that people should be even better than the masters. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, we have to look back at that old wisdom. You know, it's obviously wisdom. It's amazing stuff, and I think it's important. In your experience, do you feel like we are better? We should be better? Can anyone ever be better than those masters? You know what I'm saying there?
Well, I think better is a tricky word.
Yeah.
Right. I think when it comes to looking back at the masters, I think that's a foundation to build upon and something to aim toward when it comes to the ideals. You know, I mean, if we think about, like, when we're talking about the masters, the old dead guys, right? If we're thinking about that, well, gosh, as a general industry, we know so much more now about fitness and nutrition and psychology than what was known at that point. So I think we're really doing something wrong if we don't do a little better, at least on that side of things. I think that it's that idea, there's nothing new under the sun, right? But there's ways of applying what we know that I think are really important. It's important to look back at the masters and use that as a base.
Mm-hmm.
You know, use that as a base. I mean, there's lots of things that you read about and things that you see, you know, the pictures of, you know, like the drawing, painting pictures and things like that, that you wouldn't want to recreate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Like when people talk about Boucher, there's usually this little disclaimer. It's like Boucher of the second manner. It's like after the chandelier fell and he got hurt and he couldn't manhandle one like some of those guys on RFD TV. Then he learned to do it better. So it's like even the masters learn from the masters and collaborate with the masters and improve upon what they know and what they're doing. It's that's a library there, that I think is so important to pull from.
So I was talking about mutually beneficial, and we do movements for a reason and all of that. When it comes to like the airs above the ground, let's say, now there is certainly a reason for those to exist. Is there any reason for that to exist now? That's mutually beneficial.
I think there's as much reason for that to exist as the painting behind you and what's hanging on your wall. It's because we can. It's because it brings more to the relationship, brings more to the situation. Most of us have zero reason to ask a horse to capriole, except that if that isn't utilized, it becomes lost. Right?
And well, if that'll tie us in perfectly to the podcast title, the Optimized Equine Podcast. So, is there any reason to learn something hard? Yeah, sometimes there is a very specific reason. That's a perfect way to put that, I think. Yeah, there's no reason they have to do that, but the act of learning it can lead to beautiful things. It's a hard thing, I think it's really easy to look at it and be like, like, why? There's no need for that. That can't possibly be good for them. I'm not saying it is or isn't good for them physically, but even if it's physically a wear and tear thing, the mental game that went into learning it surely must have benefit there. That's what optimization is all about.
Absolutely. And I think optimization is such a good word, and what's our responsibility as a rider and as a trainer? It's to bring the horse back to the state he was in before we climbed on. Right. And so we think about, our riding, there's different phases in our riding. Right. And, one of those initial phases is like the therapeutic phase, where we bring the horse into balance and into strength so that they can carry us as well as they can carry themselves when we're not on them. Right. And then there becomes the amplification phase of our training, where when you watch your horse playing out in the field, when he is at his most exuberant, can you, while you're riding, bring that out in him? Right? So that's that amplification phase. And when we think about the airs above the ground, those are incredibly strenuous. You look at a horse holding a levad, and there's a sequencing to those movements. They build on each other. A lot of times people think of the piaffe as being this, that's the upper echelon. The piaffe is an introductory air. The piaffe helps us evaluate, among other things, is a horse loading each hind leg equally so that they can come into levad eventually. So they can rock back on their haunches and be able to draw the forehand up off the ground, right? So the piaffe, if we're thinking about it in the systematic approach, the piaffe is a preparatory exercise to build the strength to do that next move, right? And then from your levad, eventually you may decide you want to take that horse up into the capriole, where he has to be able to load his haunches well enough that he can jump up into the air, right? So it's all, what do we have to do with this horse to physically develop him so that he can do these things, right? So that he can use himself as if he were unconstrained and out in the field expressing all of his exuberance, right? And again, it goes back to, how does that horse feel about himself when he's with you? if you ask him to do that, can you exercise him? Can you develop him in such a way that if he does do that, you're not hanging on his mouth, you're not constricting him, you're not whatever, but that it's not injuring him that he's done it, right? That you've actually developed him. Because, you could go out and, I don't know, lift up some massive heavy weight right now and potentially hurt yourself. Or you could successively build your strength so that then you could go out and lift that weight and it wouldn't injure you.
Well, thank you for answering that, because sometimes for me, seeing how that stuff looks is like, what? Why? Like, why do that? But really, it comes down to the optimization thing. It's a beautiful process. And the point was to work towards it, and if you never got there, you never got there. Who cares? It's not that. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. It's always, can we get one step closer to that ideal? Right. And so it's like when we talk about, are we still working for what the masters talked about or what the masters wrote about? Those masters were talking about developing the horse to his highest potential.
And I can only guess that no master was out there going, this is it, I'm done. You know what I mean? Like
Probably not. Yeah, you're right.
Here, this is what it looks like. Yeah, I am here. I hope you all can join me someday. They were never saying that. I know that for,
Right.
They too were, once they're there, I'm sure, going, can we be better? Can we be better? All the time, I'm sure,
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. But it's, as Charles has said, art only survives through its most recent living practitioners. And when we talk about horsemanship as an art, what does that mean? Art to what end, right? And when it comes to horsemanship, at least in the way that we're talking about it, the art is to develop that horse to their optimal, right?
Which can change every day. It should. If it's not,
Absolutely.
then you're kidding yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
Not a little bit.
Right. And that's I think one of the interesting things, in that horses have always been a part of human evolution as it goes, when it comes to civilizations and and this idea of art, that we're always looking to that as a means of growing, because to help the horse become the best that they can be, we have to develop in ourselves as well.
I like how you put that, because I think that's a really interesting way of thinking of horses. People who often will talk about, we don't need them anymore like we used to. But we totally do. It's just in a different way. This is what we need them for right now, is this connection thing, if we want to call it that.
Yeah, absolutely. All throughout history, people have looked at horses and tried to improve the horse, to improve themselves in order to improve the horse, and the horse has helped to improve the person when it comes to traveling, conquering the world, right? And now, interesting, now more than ever, the world that horse is helping us conquer is the one that lives between our ears.
Ain't that
the hardest one to conquer too.
Yeah, that is for sure. Thank God for horses. Oh, man. Yeah. Well, we have been at it. We should probably wrap this up, eh?
There you go.
So, can you tell us... Good. Well, I'm glad. It's always fun chatting with you. I'm glad we finally recorded it.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Yes. So, can you tell us a little bit about how people can connect with you, find you? What are you doing these days?
Yeah, what am I doing? So people can find me through the social medias, the interwebs, right? On Facebook, it's Patrick King Horsemanship and Dressage. On Instagram, on whatever, all those other things, you can find it the same way. You can find me through two different websites, one pkhorsemanship.com and another through Academy for Classical Horsemanship.com. It's an online platform that I've developed over the last several years, kind of the online monthly membership sort of thing, where members get monthly videos and we have weekly discussions and Zoom meetings and things like that. That's really fun.
Hey, and that is also how people would connect with you for virtual lessons, which I highly recommend. I would have never thought it was possible to accomplish as much that way as it has been for us. You know, when we first started working together and we just had just the clinic time when we could get you to Arizona versus once we started doing regular virtual lessons in between. Wow, that was big game changer. Yeah. It's pretty amazing. And I think it's intimidating for people to go there if they're not super comfortable with it. But I will say from experience, it is well worth it. Dive in. If you have a awkward connection or whatever, just keep doing them. Because I feel we've had the experience where I think my Pivo took some methamphetamine or something. I don't know, but it's dancing around, doing crazy things. That doesn't happen very often, but it's happened a time or two. But we had done it so regularly that we still got stuff accomplished that day, you know? So I definitely think people should try it and not just try it once. Like, dive in and do it regularly, because I think that's where the magic happens. Is in sticking
the virtual lessons. It was such a. I feel like I was kind of late to the party. I was a little slow getting started with the virtual lessons, but I'm so grateful that I did. My thought was always, well, I can't reach out and touch the rein, or I can't, I won't be able to see as much virtually as I can in person. You can, even with a bad signal. I find that there's so much that I can see, and students are making so much fantastic progress. It's amazing to see the progress that students are making virtually. And it's super fun to be able to be in, several different countries and several different states all in one day, and there's no jet lag, right? But it's amazing as somebody who teaches as much as I teach, to be able to teach and feel like the virtual lessons are equally as valuable as the in-person lessons. Like, I never thought I would ever say that.
Yeah. Agreed. I think in the beginning it was like, well, this'll do in between our in-person things, but really once we just made a thing of it and kept going, it's pretty amazing what can be done and accomplished. So highly recommend.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much. It has been a blast. No surprise there. I knew it would be. So
super fun. It always is. Thank you.
Well, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
You bet.
That's a wrap. Thank you for listening. If you can, please rate or review the show, subscribe, comment, share with a friend. We also really appreciate your participation on social media. Anything you may be called to do will help us reach new listeners and help the style of horsemanship to flourish. Until next time, happy horsing.